So we'll begin, as usual, for the Dhamma Talk evening, chanting the refuges and the precepts together. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangam saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi buddham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi sangam saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi buddham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi sangam saranam gacchami. Panatipata veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Adinadana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Abrahmacharya veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Musawada veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Surameraya Majapamadhatana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Vikala bhojana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Nacha gita wadita visukadasana malaganda vilepana dharana mandana vipusanatana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Uchasayana mahasayana veramani sikapadam samadhiyami. Idam me silam maga palanyana sa pachayo otu. And this evening we have the gift of receiving a Dhamma talk from Kristina.
I just want to check the sound, if the sound level is good for everybody. Great. So I call this Dhamma talk, learning how to love the hindrances. So it's going to be a Dhamma talk about working with the hindrances within our metta practice. So what I really love about metta practice is that we can bring this quality of metta to absolutely everything that arises in our practice, even to the most difficult and painful experiences that we may have. So sometimes our metta practice is moving along very easily and we are fully involved with directing the metta phrases to different beings and within the different categories. And slowly we are cultivating this energy of loving kindness. But then there's these other times when we're facing really difficult mind and body states the hindrances, and they call our attention away from being with the phrases and being with the beings that we're working with. So sometimes we can let these hindrances be in the background while we continue working with the metta phrases with the different beings. But there are times when the hindrances become so persistent that they call our full attention, and we need to find ways of skillfully opening to them and working with them more fully. So the good news is that whatever we are experiencing, it does not have to take us away from the cultivation of metta practice or cultivation of metta, because working with the hindrances can in itself be a form of metta practice. So if we can meet the hindrances with a kind attitude, patient and kind, then we're actually working with the hindrances and not abandoning our metta practice. And from this place of kind attention, we're much better able to work skillfully with them and find ways of coming into a more balanced place again. So it may seem like a really big mouthful to expect ourselves to be meeting our hindrances with loving kindness if we're already really caught up in self-doubt and judgments and fears. It may feel like a lot to think of bringing kindness into those places. However, even if we can't feel the warmth of metta, we can still have this intention of meeting whatever is happening within us with this kind and patient attitude. And that way we're not relying on a feeling to continue our practice, but we can trust that the intention to practice metta is very powerful and can help us work with these hindrances in a more skillful way. So in my own experience, when I've been really entangled in painful mental and emotional states, the intention to meet these states with metta has felt like a subtle backdrop that has really helped to create space within myself for this inner turmoil. It's sort of like being met by a caring friend that doesn't try to change any of the experiences you're having, but is just able to listen with patience and kindness and acceptance. And we probably have all had the experience that that really helps to release some of the tension we might be feeling. So this has helped me come more into the present moment and release the storyline that was connected to the difficulties. And by releasing the storyline, I really come back to the practice and have been able to release some of the hindrances. So I think that this can actually sometimes happen in metta practice, that as we start to cultivate more of this patient, kind attitude towards ourselves, it's almost like there's this other part of us that starts to respond to that by bringing up what's sorrowful, what's difficult, what's painful. And again, the parallel with a good friend, if we meet with a good friend and they really listen in this kind, patient way, we probably all felt that then it's easier to open up to the places that really hurt. So as Marcia has said several times, this practice of loving kindness is in itself a purification practice. So metta is this pure, unconditional, selfless love. And as we start to develop and cultivate this pure love, it will bring up all the ways that our love is entangled with attachments and resentments. So it's not a mistake that these difficult mind states arise during our practice. It's a total normal part of the process. It's part of that purification process. So the Buddha listed 5 so-called hindrances that arise in our practice. Sometimes they come one at a time, and sometimes they come like in big piles, one hindrance on top of the other. So the hindrances are called sensual desire or greed, ill will, sloth and torpor, and restlessness, and the last one is doubt. So maybe a good starting point is asking, what do these hindrances hinder? What are they obstacles to? And in brief, they're obstacles to our ability to stay focused with our chosen meditation object. So for example, if we've decided we're going to be practicing metta for 30 minutes with a particular being, and we find that our mind is off to what we're going to have for lunch, or what we said 5 years ago, or what's going to happen after the practice, then we're likely impacted by one or several of the hindrances. So the good news is that our Theravada tradition describes hindrances as a totally normal part of our meditation development. They will lessen over time. As our meditation strengthens, as our concentration strengthens, these hindrances are going to become less hindering. But it's also good to know that at least some of them are going to continue on until we're fully liberated. So again, they are going to show. So as a rule of thumb in metta practice, if the hindrances are more in the background, we actually let them be in the background. So we don't sort of pull them in and try to look at them if they're more like a whisper in the back of the mind. But we may briefly acknowledge them, saying there's sleepiness, there's restlessness, there's doubt. And then to the best of our ability, we come back to saying the metta phrases, letting the hindrances be in the background. The development of metta is strengthened with ease and well-being. And this is one of the reasons why we don't give difficult mind states a lot of attention unless they really grab our attention. So in general, the more attention we can devote to the more easeful parts of our experience, the more metta has a chance to grow and develop. And the more attention we give to difficult mind states, the more difficult it might be for metta to grow and develop. So again, to the best of our ability, we let the hindrances be part of our experience, not getting rid of them, but also not giving them a ton of attention, unless they really grab our attention. So in my own practice, it took me a really long time to learn this. So my cultural and personal conditioning led me to really focus in on difficulties in my mind. So when I noticed tiredness, doubt, or restlessness, I would investigate, analyze, scrutinize the experience. So it came from a good intention, like it came from a wish to have a really honest practice. But I later learned that there was a subtle layer of self-judgment and aversion that came along with that approach to myself. And then I also noticed that a hyper focus on my difficulties led to a loss of energy or to a restless mind. So as we've talked about, the proximate cause for metta to grow is to see the goodness in beings. And that means seeing the goodness in us. And so we want to learn to be mindful with the goodness in ourselves and in other beings. That's part of the process. And being able to um, invite the attention to also rest with our own goodness and the goodness of other beings. So one of the things that's helped me in bringing this kind attitude to my practice, bring this metta attitude, has been what I've called harmonizing with the hindrances. So what does it mean to harmonize? It means to bring different forces into harmony with each other rather than having them fight each other or get into a battle with each other. An image that might illustrate this is if you imagine that you had a grumpy family member come for a visit, and uh, and so you might invite them in. You might listen to what's going on for them. You might smile. You might sort of pat their back, uh, authentically. And yet at the same time, you don't go along with them into the big, long, grumpy story. And when there's a pause in the story, then you might redirect them and say, "Hey, did you see the beautiful flowers?" Or "Look at the garden. Look at all the beautiful trees out there." So this could be one image of how to work with some of these difficult mind states in our own minds, giving the family member a chance to vent, but at the same time not letting it totally overtake other things that are also happening in our practice. So harmonizing also means balancing our energies. And and what happens over time is that as we get more concentrated, then the hindrances will naturally tend to fade out and fade in the background. So a part of our work is to learn how to create the right conditions for concentration to grow and strengthen. Because as we take more delight in what we're doing, this focused mind might start to develop, and then the hindrances are sort of going to fade on their own. So now I want to talk a little bit more about the individual hindrances and how we might work with them when they're a little bit more challenging, when they're not in the background, but they're more in the foreground, which happens to all of us. So some years ago, I set a retreat where I practiced mindfulness of the body. So that meant that everything that would arise, also things arising in the mind, I would actually explore the somatic or energetic dimension of what would arise in the mind. So I got to explore the hindrances as they were coming and going, and explore their energetic or somatic dimension. And so as I go through the hindrances, I'm going to offer this, what I discovered, and that may or may not fit for you. So again, it's an offering. So the first hindrance is called greed or sensual desire. And with this hindrance, we desire or crave pleasant experiences through the sense doors. So pleasant body sensations, pleasant smells, pleasant sights, pleasant thoughts even. And through our practice, through our metta practice, for sure, there will be pleasant moments. It's sort of part of the practice that as the practice strengthens, we may experience the body relaxing moments or longer moments of the body relaxing, of the mind feeling very joyful. So pleasant is not the problem. It's how we relate to the pleasant that's the problem. So if we have pleasant in our practice, and we then start to grab onto it, to identify with it, to want more of it, to seek it, to try to have it come back, that's when we are really into this more. That's when we're into this more, the hindrance part of it. So energetically, it can feel like we're being pulled forward, almost like, oh, I want it. There's that energy of being pulled forward, or sometimes it feels like a tightening, sort of like I'm just like, it's not good enough. This moment is not good enough. So it is like we can't find ease in this moment, so we thirst for another moment, a more satisfying experience. And if we're already in a satisfying moment, we may dream of another pleasant experience in the future. And we may dream of how we can keep this pleasant experience or have more of it. So sensual desires, a hindrance, may come in many forms during our meditation practice. One that we can probably all relate to is like dreaming of the next cup of tea, or what we can have for lunch, or something like this. Or if we're having a pleasant sit, we may dream of like, oh, when I get home, I'm gonna do this practice every day, or my next retreat, I'm gonna have more of these metta retreats. These are so great. So again, it takes us out of the present moment and into this dreaming and this elaboration around how we can have more pleasant. So one difficulty with this hindrance of sensual desire is that it can be really hard to catch it. I think as humans, we're so programmed to take pleasant experiences to be our natural state, and unpleasant states to be something foreign to us. So it's almost like when we have pleasant, it's like, okay, there we go. This is how it's supposed to be. And when we have unpleasant experiences, like, this is not how my life is supposed to be. My partner and I watched a program in the fall called Alone, and it was about people surviving in the wilderness. And so they had to catch their own food, find their own things to eat. And often they would actually go for several days without finding plants to eat, or without catching fish. And what was so obvious was that when they did catch a fish, then it was like, oh, there we go. Everything is going to be great from now on. Like, now my life is going to be like this forever. It was bad before, but from now on, forever, this is how it's going to be. And it was so obvious to see them do it. And so my partner and I, we're now whenever we notice that in our own minds or in each other's minds, we say jokingly, like, I caught a fish, just because we can notice this pattern in our own mind, this tendency uh, to grab a pleasant experience and try to hold on to it and try to secure it and try to sort of like, okay, this is going to be my life from now on. So another thing about this sensual desire is that that we often, the thing we desire, we think that somehow the pleasantness is in the thing. So like when we desire lunch, we think that the pleasant is in the lunch. But if we look a little bit closer, we can see that the pleasant, it's in the contact with the lunch that we have this pleasant experience, and it's the pleasant experience that we're actually craving. So this is just an interesting thing to watch. So the hindrance of sensual desire is closely related to what is called the near enemy of metta. So the near enemy of metta is attached love rather than unconditional love. And it's called the near enemy because in some ways it might actually look like metta. So attached love also sees the positive in what we're paying attention to. So it sees something and then it has a positive, oh, I like that, I love that, this is beautiful. But attached love, again, has this energy of wanting to secure it, wanting to keep it, wanting to hold on to that pleasant experience. Whereas metta sees the beauty and appreciates the goodness, but it has an open hand. It doesn't try to hold on to it. And if we look a little bit closer at this attached love, we'll see that it has a lot of conditions. Like, I love you if you act and do, if you act and act in this way. I'll love you if you love me back. So again, it has a lot of conditions, not like metta. So many of you may be familiar with the acronym of RAIN, which was developed by the Vipassana teacher Michelle McDonald. And this tool, RAIN, can be really helpful in working with the difficulties in our minds. So the R in RAIN stands for recognizing what is happening, that a hindrance is here. So being able to name the hindrance if possible is really a helpful first step. It just creates a little bit of distance to say, okay, here is desire, here is doubt, or whatever the hindrance might be. As mentioned, this attached love can be really hard to recognize as it often masquerades as loving kindness. But we might recognize it as like thoughts and fantasies about how we can secure that connection with the thing we love, what we can do to keep it, or it may also come up as fear in terms of like what we might do if we were to lose it. So this would be an indication that, for example, in our metta practice, that there might be this dimension of attached love. And A stands for accept. So really accepting that in this moment, the mind is actually overtaken by this hindrance. And so we need to look at it a little bit closer. I stands for investigate, getting curious about the experience. And it's not an analytical type of investigation. It's much more of a being curious and really opening possibly to the bodily, somatic, energetic dimension of the experience. So we step out of the storyline, we leave the storyline about what we love or what we want to keep or how we're afraid of it, of losing it. And then we step into how does it actually feel in the body? What's actually happening in the body? What's the energy in the body? What might be some of the action urges associated with it? And we might also look at what are the changes? Does it fluctuate or does it stay the same? And we might look at the inner dialogue in the mind, again, not stepping into the dialogue, but just watching the mind and the dialogue it might have about our connection with the thing we love. And N stands for non-identification. So really seeing our experience as impersonal and as a conditioned state of mind, not permanent, arising out of causes and conditions. This is not me. This is not mine. I am not this. So with desire and attachment, we remember that this is really an impersonal energy that as humans, we all experience this. Like it comes in various forms. We all have our own sankharas or habits in our minds, but basically we all know this energy. Um, Perhaps except for those that are already enlightened or very close to enlightened. They may actually be free from this energy. Um, so it has to do with the deeper patterns of greed, hatred, and delusion that the Buddha pointed out to us. It comes in personal forms, but this is basically the energy that's at play here. So when we disidentify with the hindrance of attachment, it does lose its power and fades away because we're no longer feeding the storyline, and we see it as this conditioned, impersonal, impermanent phenomena that's moving through our mind, coming and going. The second hindrance is called ill will or aversion. And when ill will and aversion is very strong, our mind is constantly picking up signs of disliking in whatever we're paying attention to. So as opposed to desire, we have a negative evaluation of what we're paying attention to. So we may dislike ourselves, find faults within our own minds, things we don't like about ourselves, or we may dislike other people, judge them, look for faults in them. We may dislike the meditation, the teachers, or the instructions. We may dislike how our bodies are feeling. It can come in many forms. So this hindrance is often easier to recognize because we are very aware that something is wrong. That's often a good sign. This sense of like something is wrong, something is, this shouldn't be so. Um, Energetically, for at least in my own experience, it can feel like we're either like pushing something away, or we are ourselves be moving backwards away from what we're paying attention to. So aversion often also can include fear, and as humans, when we experience something as fearful, we often have this energetic response of pulling away, of getting away from. What I learned through my training as a psychologist was that all emotions have basically sort of like you could call it a biological program that it runs within us. So this biological program, once an emotion has fired, gives us a strong action prompt to do certain things. Um, so when we interpret something as harmful or dangerous to us, this may either initiate the defend program or the flight program within us. So with the defend program, we push away, we set boundaries, and we take actions to remove what it is we don't want to have in our field of awareness or our physical field. With the flight program, we are prompted to physically and mentally remove ourselves from the threat. So it's more like almost like a run away response that we might have. And I think mentally we can run away as well. We probably all know that feeling of mentally escaping or mentally running away. So the hindrance of ill will is also called the far enemy of metta. So the mind that's looking for things that it dislikes is actually the opposite of metta mind, that is seeing things that it appreciates and things that are that it cares for. So that this aversion will often come up as part of the natural purification process. And again, as we aim to develop this unconditional, boundless love, we are bound to call up all the parts of us that are still resisting this boundless love. This is normal and natural. It's only the fully liberated heart that can fully, steadily, and equally love all beings. The rest of us are working on these very deep habits in our minds. So when we practice metta, in some way, we're calling up all these patterns that are preventing this boundless love. We're calling them forth as we say the phrases and as we work through the different categories. One of the very painful experiences we can sometimes have is ill will towards ourselves. So this can come in the form of self-criticism, pointing out our mistakes, all the imperfect qualities we believe that we have. It may be like a subtle tightening in the mind, reminding ourselves to constantly do better or be better. Sometimes it comes like in the form of a very deep self-loathing, where we energetically yell at ourselves, or actually sort of like with our inner dialogue punish ourselves. Um, in metta, sometimes this pattern can show as actually scolding ourselves for not feeling metta, feeling somehow defective or bad people. I'm incapable of feeling love. So these patterns of self-criticism and self-loathing can be very deep and very painful. And they may be due to some personal conditioning through our own upbringing. But they could also relate to cultural conditioning, where we've learned maybe that it's selfish to love ourselves, that loving ourselves may mean that then there's less love for others. So what if it was really like, if we love ourselves more, then there's more love for others? What if we turned it around that way? I think that part of the reason why we start with metta for self is not always because it's easy, but because it's really fundamental for our capacity to really open to love to all beings. And for many of us, there is some very deep habits about not actually being able to really fully bring care and love to ourselves. So when the mind is overtaken by the hindrance of ill will, we want to first of all recognize it and name it. And as I shared, I think it can often be recognized as a critical, judging, or angry thoughts, an inner voice. Sometimes it's pointed inwardly, like we're having this inner voice towards ourselves, but sometimes it's pointed outwardly, just this critical voice with everything we see. It's not good enough. It should be different. Um, and then again, when we notice that, it may be helpful to notice, see if we can release that story and all those stories that's moving through the mind, and see if we can come into the somatic experience of it, the energetic experience of it. So again, how does it feel like in the body? What is the experience of this aversive energy? What is it like in the body? We might also try to see if we can explore um, the energy of the mind. So without going into the individual thoughts, but just getting the sort of just getting a sense of this maybe grumpy mind or angry mind, and just get a sense of that energy of the mind. Um, I think in my own practice, it's been helpful to recognize, to release once I've identified it, and I can see how it's operating in my body and mind. To encourage myself to release it. Sometimes I thought about it as like, okay, it's like drinking poison, thinking someone else is going to die. So when I have a lot of angry thoughts about maybe some relative, uh, and I think like I'm working things out in my mind, like if I can really tell them the truth and we can have justice in this situation, then everything will be good. But then I realized that, I'm actually the one suffering in that moment. All those angry thoughts, I'm poisoning my own system. I'm poisoning my own mind. Um, so metta is considered the remedy for ill will, and it's the opposite to ill will. So it can be really helpful when we notice that aversion is in our mind, to bring again this metta energy to the aversion, so that we don't meet aversion with aversion. Another thing, a more practical thing that might help, is to see if you can release the angry energy as you're walking. Again, seeing if there's a way to not hold on to it, but to let it go, to release it. So the next hindrance is called Sloth and Torpor. And this hindrance can be felt like a sinking energy, possibly a heavy energy in the body and the mind. And sometimes we actually do feel sleepy and drowsy, but other times it manifests more like Spacey Mind. Um, so in metta practice, we may notice this as like we're getting the phrases wrong, or all of a sudden we're forgetting who we're working with. So we become aware that that's at some place we drifted off. Like it sounded good, like we are just repeating the phrases, but then we realize that we're like really off. We don't know what we're doing. So I think we are all so busy in our daily lives, multitasking and doing many, many things at a time. And when we settle into retreat, we are starting to pay attention to much subtler and much simpler experiences than what we're used to in our daily lives. And I think it takes some time for us to actually settle in with that subtle level of experience. So the Buddha taught us that a common reaction to more subtle, or you could call it neutral experiences, is spacing out. And from a nervous system perspective, we're really geared to avoid danger and to seek pleasant experiences. So from a nervous system perspective, it makes sense that when things are more calm, then the mind is like, okay, I can take a rest now. There's nothing I need to pay attention to. But of course, in our meditation practice, that's not a really good strategy, because as we know, as our practice deepens, our experiences will get more subtle. And it's nice to be able to really be attentive with that process. Uh, so sloth and torpor may also arise as concentration and calm starts to build, but there's not enough energy and interest in the system yet. So this is often in the beginning of a retreat. So it's quite natural for sloth and torpor to be there for us in the beginning of a retreat. And sometimes it's just a matter of, in a way, waiting it out and maybe seeing if there is a way of balancing the energy a little bit more. But there are some times when it remains an ongoing challenge. So in my own practice, I actually had a very subtle clinging to this. You could call it like a spacey mind. So for me, it was felt like a very pleasant experience. Um, and it took me a long time to realize that what I called like a really good sit, it was very calm and very relaxed, but there was almost zero mindfulness. So I would come in and report to my teachers, and I would say, "Oh, this was a great sit." And then they asked me, "And so what came up in your sit?" And I said, "I don't know." And it was because I was in this state of spacey mind. So I had to start investigating what that state felt like, opening to what was the energy of it, how did it feel, and then really starting to see that it was pleasant, and that I was clinging to that pleasant, and that clinging to to that pleasant kept it going. And once I really saw that clearly, and also recognized that this wasn't very helpful practice, it was pleasant, an hour pleasant, but it really didn't support my ongoing practice, there was a release. Again, I wouldn't say I released it, but it released as a result of seeing that. Um, so for others, this sloth and torpor could be felt as very unpleasant, but it's the same process of recognizing it and investigating it. Again, not in an analytical sense, but knowing it, knowing how it's felt from moment to moment to moment, and then, if possible, um, stepping out of being identified with it. So more sort of practical things of how to bring up energy. We may say the phrases with more enthusiasm. That's one way that we sort of bring some energy and joy into saying the phrases. Like, I know you're going to say them in your own mind, but still, there could be more joy and energy that we bring into it. And again, you could imagine that you're almost like saying them louder. That could be another way of possibly bring energy to the practice. We may try to see if we can make if we're working with an image of the person, see if you can make it clearer, or if you can get the felt sense of the person clearer. That's another way of bringing interest into the practice. We may go for vigorous walks. We may do body practice. One thing that's helped me a lot is actually to do the metta chant. So again, you have to explore for yourself to see if that brings up some joy and some energy for you. But for me, when I felt very sleepy, then sitting down and chanting for myself was a way of really inspiring myself. And of course, opening our eyes and standing up in meditation if we're really overwhelmed by sloth and torpor. So whereas sloth and torpor can be felt like a sinking, quiet energy, then restlessness has almost like too much energy, and it can be felt like a buzzing, vibrating energy in the body and the mind. Sometimes it's felt mostly in the body, like we can't sit still, we're really fidgety. There's just too much energy in the body, and sometimes it's more in the mind. And when it's in the mind, it may show as like really excited plans. Um, it could also show us a lot of anxiousness about the future or the past, or a lot of regrets about things we may have done or said in the past. So remorse for harm we've caused ourselves or others can be a really good part of the purification process. But if it's accompanied by unhealthy self-judgment, like we are feeling remorse and then we're judging ourselves for what we feel we did wrong, then we actually don't move through an inner forgiveness and letting go process. And then we just are stuck in this, you know, sense of this was wrong. So what can also sometimes happen with the metta practice is that there can be overexcitement. So sometimes with the deepening of metta, there can be an opening to quite a lot of joy. And if we're not really used to running a lot of joy through our system, then that joyful energy, um, I want to say it's almost like it doesn't have a place to go within our system. And so it may show us like, I can't sit still, or it may show us like a lot of joyous planning in the future about things we want, or now I got it, I'm gonna, start, I don't know, a new exercise regime, or excitement about the Dhamma maybe could also be a sign. Uh, and it actually, this joy that can't settle, or if there's not enough space for the joy, uh, it prevents us from actually settling into the practice. So just as sloth and torpor can be a sign that there's a initial energy imbalance as we start to practice, then a lot of restlessness can also be a sign that we're in a sort of balancing period of time in the retreat. And again, if we can step out of the storyline that may come along with the restlessness and feel the energy in the body, maybe as buzzing, vibrating, pulsing sensations. Again, that helps to sort of step away a little bit from continuing that habit or continuing that hindrance. Um, and if we can find a way to make space around the energy, so either like if it's a lot of restless energy in the mind, if we could imagine that we're sort of bringing a very spacious mind to the energy of restlessness, so we can imagine that the awareness itself can be very spacious. That can help to create more space for this energy. We might also see if there's a way to bring a spaciousness to the body. So during a time in my practice when I was practicing concentration practice, there was quite a lot of building of energy in the body. And what I found really helpful was to lie down and see if I could relax the body and invite the body to have space for this energy. And again, this was just one thing that may or may not work for you. It can also be helpful to go for vigorous walks so that you're not inviting the body to relax or open to the excess energy, but you're actually using it for walking. Sometimes doing more walking practice, saying the metta phrases might help you with some of this excess energy. You could stand up and open your eyes if it's hard to sit still. So the last hindrance is called doubt. And this may, for many of us, be the hardest one to identify. It often comes as a very rational, clever voice, inner voice, questioning ourselves, our own ability to practice, maybe questioning the way that we're practicing. Is this right? Is this the right practice for me? I heard another teacher said I should do this. Sometimes it's even questioning whether we should be practicing. And I think we're often very identified with this inner voice of doubt. We're so used to in our daily lives that we actually need to be bringing this analytical approach. We need to explore, is this right or is that right, or should I do this or do that? So we have a lot of training in with this type of mind that questions and that reflects and that asks a lot of questions about what we're doing. So it's not strange that we bring this voice into our practice and that we identify with it so strongly. So energetically, this voice of doubt can almost be felt like a standstill, that we come to a freeze, like we just stop, and we basically stop practicing because we're so in this doubting mind that not a lot of practice is happening. We spend so much time thinking about our practice rather than actually practicing. So again, doubt may show us a lot of questions about our practice. Should I walk or should I sit? Should I offer metta for myself or for someone else? Should I use this benefactor or that benefactor, this family member or that family member? Should I do metta or vipassana? Or should I even practice? Is this a good time for me to practice? So the opposite of doubt is having confidence in ourselves, in the practice, and in the bigger benefit of practicing. And the paradox with confidence is that uh, we're asked to have this very open, not knowing approach in our practice. So each moment is unique, and we're called to open to this uniqueness. We simply cannot know what's going to arise in the next moment. And we can't know how this retreat is going to unfold for us. So we have to continually practice with an open mind and an open heart, opening from moment to moment to our unfolding experience. So this means that we have to put aside our usual habits of needing to know, judging what is happening, analyzing if it's good or bad. So in many ways, we must trust the meditation process described by the Buddha and the practice instructions suggested within our tradition. Over time, we get to develop our own direct confidence in the teachings and the practices that we do. We start to see for ourselves that when we follow this map, it works out just the way the Buddha said. So knowing doubt as doubt can be really challenging because, again, we're so identified with this analytical voice. But again, it might be known as this standstill in practice and this questioning of our practice. So getting clarity when we have a lot of doubts and a lot of questions is a really good remedy for doubt. So actually bringing up the questions with the teachers can be a really good first helpful step, clarifying the questions that you have. But if you find that doubt still continues and it's sort of like an ongoing thing in your retreat, you may have to use some of these brain tools to help recognizing it and work through it. So once we have identified doubt and we've seen how it's operating in our mind, and one thing that might help us is to remind ourselves why we are here, and that we're here for just a very brief period of time, and that this time that we're here is extremely precious. Like, how often do we get to take this many days to sit? So we can't know for sure how this retreat is going to unfold for us and if we will benefit from it, but probably it won't harm us. That much we can probably rely on. So I've sometimes approached my retreat practice as a job or an assignment that I've been given. So in a way, when I approach it that way, it's not up for me to question whether it's useful or not. I'm sort of showing up for the job and following the instructions that I've been given. So I simply attend to the assignment and to the best of my ability. I fulfill the job that I've been given. And that way, in a way, I take the doubting voice out of the equation and I put my trust in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And say, "Yeah, I can't know it. My mind is too small and too caught up in its selfing experiment or its selfing process. I can't actually know how this process might benefit me, but I can trust the teachings." So as talked about earlier, metta is a purification process that is bound to bring up difficulties. One could say that as the cloth gets cleaner, more of the small dirt particles are going to show. So as our mindfulness strengthens and as our metta strengthens, we're going to see with more and more clarity the parts that are still entangled and that we are still working with. The most painful aspect of the hindrances are really the identification with them, taking them to be me or mine. If we're not identified with them, they just pass through like different weather systems, passing through the sky. They're not a problem, natural arisings. So metta has the energy of letting everything belong. Nothing is wrong. There's nothing that can't belong. And we can bring this energy to our practice, letting everything belong. That's a kind attitude. So bringing this metta to the hindrances can help us soften around them and release the identification with the hindrances. And bringing this metta quality to our work with the hindrances also means that we never fall out of our practice. So let's say we have a full day that's just where we're tormented by restlessness or aversion. We're still practicing. It's all good. Um, when we bring a loving attitude, there can be a sense of safety. The safer and more easeful we feel, the more the metta can grow. The more the metta can grow, the more natural delight we can have in our practice. The more natural delight we can have in our practice, the more the hindrances are going to fall in the background by themselves. So at the end here, I'd like to share, I want to call it a metta prayer. So my partner is a Dhamma teacher, and he has developed this prayer to work with himself and also with the students that he works with. So it's called During Hindrances or Challenging Times. May I love myself, especially when I can't. May I love myself when my mind wanders. May I love myself when sleepiness or restlessness arises. May I love myself when anger or boredom arises. May I love myself when craving or obsession arises. May I love myself when doubt arises. May I love myself when physical pain arises. May I love myself especially when I think that my practice sucks. So let's sit for a few minutes or for a few moments. Thank you for your attention.